Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our ransomware in the financial sector webinar. We think you're really going to enjoy this particular topic. We have some experts from the industry that will really give you something to think about. My name is Catherine Baxter. I'm going to be your moderator along with Ernest Chambers today. But before we get started, we have a few administrative announcements, please. If you can't hear me, please adjust your volume up. If you're still having problems with your volume, send us some help, please, with using your Q&A feature on the right-hand side of your console. Also, during the webinar, please submit your questions through the Q&A feature. Don't wait until the end. And if you know the speaker's name that you'd like to answer your question, please address your question to that speaker. In approximately 1 week, we're going to close caption this webinar for on-demand viewing in our learning management system. So now we have this Ncua disclaimer that I must read for you. It says, the materials presented in this webinar are intended as an informative and educational summary of general information on ransomware intrusion. The Ncua has taken reasonable measures to ensure the quality of the data and other information produced by the Ncua that is available in this presentation. The Ncua, however, makes no warranty, express or implied, nor assumes any legal liability or responsibility for the accuracy, correctness, or completeness of any information that is available through this presentation, nor represents that its use would not infringe on privately owned rights. The slides are intended for educational and discussion purposes and do not constitute legal advice nor replace independent professional judgment. Reference to any specific commercial product, process, or service by trade name, trademark, manufacturer, or otherwise does not constitute an endorsement, recommendation, or favoring by the U.S. government or the Ncua. So now it's my pleasure to present our speaker. Before I do that, we're going to have an introductory remarks by the Honorable Kyle Hoffman, who's our Ncua Vice Chairman. Ernest Chambers is going to follow Mr. Hoffman. Then we're going to introduce the speakers, and we're going to have the webinar discussion on ransomware. And while you're listening to this discussion, please pay attention to these questions and see if you can answer them yourselves. How does ransomware intrusion happen? What does ransomware intrusion look like? And what type of education and mitigation will help your institution or help you as an examiner to be able to mitigate ransomware attacks? Then we're going to have our Q&A. And as I mentioned, we are going to have now our introductory remarks by our Vice Chairman of the Ncua, Mr. Kyle S. Hoffman. Mr. Hoffman, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. And I want to thank everybody who joined today. I see 850 right now. I think we're going to have a 4-digit number at least. And that means you guys all know it's important. I want to thank everyone who put this together on the important topic. We're here to talk about ransomware. And if you remember or you heard about the famous bank robber, Willie Sutton, when they said, Willie, why do you rob banks? He said, that's where the money is. Well, that is still true. Financial institutions like credit unions are still where the money is, although they don't get robbed as much with a gun anymore. They are robbed via ransomware online. The good news, such as it is that we are not defenseless. We are going to have some great experts today, and I thank the folks from FBI, the U.S. Treasury Department, and the Wisconsin Department of Finance for giving us some tips on how not to be a victim of this. And now I'm going to hand it over to my Ncua colleague, Ernie Chambers.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hoffman. Good afternoon. It's great to be with all of you this afternoon. Cybersecurity risks remain a significant threat to the financial system. The likelihood of these dynamic and multidimensional threats adversely affecting credit unions and their members continue to both persist and evolve. Credit unions, businesses, and financial institutions need to ensure they can operate safely and effectively. Credit union operating environments are more complex today, and their network landscapes change frequently as patches and upgrades are deployed or system configurations are modified. Credit unions and businesses are increasingly moving from cloud to multi-device and hybrid environments and back and forth as their business and operational needs dictate. These changes result in their risk exposures constantly changing and in some instances actually increasing. Each and every time a new server or device is added to the network, a new potential risk is also added. With threat exposure being so dynamic, credit unions, their vendor partners, and other businesses should continuously be measuring and monitoring their risk. Prudent risk management is not a one and done activity or even a once a year checkbox activity. To effectively protect against evolving cyber threats, cyber risk management must be part of the continuous risk assessment and management process. To that end, ransomware continues to pose a major threat to our institutions with tangential concerns of the steady progression of our institutions toward cloud migration. This increase in attacks of Linux-based systems targets cryptojacking, malware, and vulnerability exploits with threat actor interest in Linux-based servers and technologies ramping up significantly in response to growing enterprise use of Linux infrastructures, especially in the cloud, to host mission-critical applications and data. This afternoon, this crack panel of cyber experts will address ransomware in the financial sector. With that, our resident moderator, Catherine Baxter, will make those introductions. Catherine?
Thank you, Ernie. Thank you so much. We do have experts here today. I think everyone's going to enjoy this presentation. Our speakers, as the Vice Chairman mentioned as well, from the FBI, we have Ted Delacourt. He's a supervisory special agent in the cyber division. We also have Tom Theune. He's a deputy director with the Wisconsin Office of Credit Unions. And also Steve Curran. He's a senior advisor for cybersecurity with U.S. Treasury. So we do have heavy hitters here. I hope everyone is going to pay attention. Before we get started, we do have a poll question, and I'm going to ask Franz to put our polling question out there so that our audience can let us know who we have today. So if you look at your screen, you'll see the polling question, everyone. We'd like to know what your asset size is if you are a credit union. Are you in the 0 to 50 million asset range, 51 to 250 million range, 251 to 500 million, 501 to 1 billion, or are you greater than 1 billion, or are you not a credit union? So use your screen and please check one of the radio buttons on your screen and let us know again. Are you a credit union in the 0 to 50, 51 to 250, 251 to 500 million, 501 to 1 billion, greater than 1 billion, or not a credit union today? So, Franz, let's just give them 10 seconds and then let's close the poll and let's see who we have here. Let's see who we have from the financial industry. Let's see how that works out. Let's show the poll. Okay, so we have a good number of people or credit unions with us that are in the $51 to $250 million range. So we have a good selection here. Also, we have quite a few that are greater than $1 billion, and we have the exam teams with us today from Ncua and state examiners. So we recognize that we have a mixed audience today, but this information that is presented is going to be for both groups. Thank you, Franz. So now let's go back to the presentation. And we're going to introduce now and hear from Ted Delacourt, Supervisory Special Agent with the FBI Cyber Division. Ted, we're listening.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and I appreciate you all taking the time today. Cybersecurity, computer intrusions, and ransomware incidents are a modern scourge across all industries. For credit union executives, the risks are double as they endeavor to secure their clients as well as their own organizations. Given the constant evolution of the cybersecurity landscape, it's critical for financial services executives to develop and maintain a functional understanding of cybersecurity technology, issues, threats, and mitigations. Slide, please. Today, I'm going to give a brief overview of who are cyber adversaries, walk through a real-life phishing example, kind of highlight some of the key points there, talk about the ransomware life cycle, how incidents escalate over time, and then discuss the difference between known vulnerabilities and zero-day exploits. Now, we're only going to touch on these issues very briefly. You could spend hours or days on each of these topics, but my goal here is just to give you just a quick overview. Slide. In general terms, the FBI organizes cyber threats into 6 groups. The FBI has the statutory authority to investigate crimes associated with all 6 threats, as illustrated here. The hacktivists are groups unaffiliated with a government or organization, and these are ones driven by ideology. The most famous hacktivist group in the cybersecurity world is Anonymous, but now with the rise of the conflict in Ukraine, there have been hacktivist groups or supposed hacktivist groups that have taken up cyber activism on both sides of the conflict. Next, we have your typical organized crime group. This is, again, ransomware, the main topic here. This is where this falls in. These groups initially began as like traditional organized crime in that they were vertically integrated, large, well-known hierarchical organizations. But over time, as the ransomware technology evolved and the rise of cryptocurrency, that these have evolved into more specialized groups where you may have heard the term in the financial press as ransomware as a service, where groups have started to specialize in different aspects of the ransomware lifecycle, as far as developing initial intrusion, designing and programming malware, dealing with exfiltration of data or encryption software, or then dealing with the negotiation or money laundering of the proceeds. So these would be this evolution of organized crime groups and ransomware as a service makes attribution and disruption of organized crime groups particularly difficult, in that now there are many actors spread across a variety of aspects, and that by being able to trade services in a typical vendor contractor type of environment, they have become far more technically savvy. Third group, insider threat. This is something banks have been familiar with from time immemorial, as far as the disgruntled employee or one driven by finance. But in modern times, there's also, we'd like to consider a new kind of passive insider threat. And this would be the employee who is just unconcerned or antagonistic of cybersecurity principles, one who finds them inconvenient or just doesn't like them, and has purposely gone around them or found workarounds to avoid the cybersecurity best practices, and thus brought in additional risks to the organization. Fourth, espionage. This would be your nation state actors, the common national security threats that we talk about. For the US would be China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. These would be targeting a lot of strategic industries, finance being one, energy, defense, and these are groups that are they're not necessarily financially motivated. They use tools, and they might even work with the organized crime groups, but to develop specific techniques or leverage technologies or innovations. But they are seeking strategic advantage, strategic surprise, and potentially strategic intellectual property from research and development. Terrorism. Some of the international terrorism groups have become so sophisticated that they've developed specific arms of their groups, where they have those who develop weapons, those who develop bombs, those who conduct reconnaissance, and then those who conduct cyber activities, to include intrusion, either to gather intelligence against possible targets or to and create disruption and fear among their targeted populations. And then finally, warfare. And this again brings us back to the Ukrainian conflict, where it both in the current Ukrainian conflict, but actually in the previous 2 conflicts involving Russia, in Ukraine in 2014 and in Georgia in 2008, that cyber warfare, cyber intrusions, disruption of cyber networks preceded a kinetic warfare when Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, and when they seized Crimea in 2014, 2015. So it is now a precursor to kinetic warfare. Slide. Now I'm going to walk through a phishing example. And while there are many forms of network intrusion, the phishing example is phishing or smishing, or all the different variations that it now takes on, is the most common that at an individual level that we're all going to experience. And one of the main takeaways I want you to have as I walk through this is that all phishing activities, whether it's in your work email, your personal email, if it's coming through an SMS on your phone, it's coming through your various chatting services on your phone, that they're all social engineering, that they're trying to create anxiety, they're anticipating you being distracted, they're trying to create an action imperative to get you to click on something without thinking, to make a move without considering the cybersecurity training that you've been given on it year after year in your organizations. Such phishing emails are blasted out in mass. It's common to receive these emails for services that were never used or subscribed. And that's one of the first key takeaways. Common and popular financial institutions, credit card companies, email services, online marketplaces, and streaming services are often spoofed. So the first thing you have to realize when you get one of these is, do I actually even subscribe to this service or have an account at this bank? And it's the age-old thing, just like the vice chairman talked about, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. But the other truism here is, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Slide, please. Now, this is an example. It's one actually I got in my own personal email. And I'm just going to highlight some of the most egregious, obvious statements here. And the reason I do that is a lot of them are very sophisticated and they're very tight. But I think in this kind of egregious example, it's easier to see the lesson and to get the takeaway. So here, typically you'll have a very urgent subject line, again, to create urgency, to create anxiety, to drive you to action. And here it's your account information. Of course, you get an email that says this. You're going to read it, you're going to open it up, and you're committed to figure out what this is about. The common hallmarks of phishing emails include a spoofed email addresses, where the email address shown at the top doesn't match the underlying email address. And you can see that here, where this one proposes to come from invoices@amazon.com, but the actual underlying email address is a bunch of gibberish and a made-up website. Many email providers provide a service where just hovering your cursor over the from line will highlight or bring up the underlying email address. And that's really one of the first things you can do to check and see, is this even real? It's not the only way to identify a phishing email, though. The main takeaway is that a reasonable attention will reveal inconsistencies in the format, the content, the grammar, and the professionalism of the communication. If you're unsure, do not click or respond. And in this one, you can see here that one of the examples of the professionalism is that if this were really from Amazon, Amazon's not going to email me about my account and then put on that two-line 100 other people. They're not going to email me about my private account and copy the world. So that's another one where it's just a real quick way to realize, boy, this is phishing and I should just delete it and just not even give it another thought. Slide, please. Now, the legitimate emails will refer you back to the main website to log in via their normal process. The key takeaway on this particular slide is that reasonable attention will reveal the inconsistencies in format, grammar, professionalism. If you click on these links, if you realize that you get an email that is not legitimate, that there are questions about the grammar, I don't belong to the service, this issue doesn't make any sense to me, this email just doesn't make any sense, it's not adding up, just don't click on the links. It's the number one thing. And because where you go from that point, despite whatever the link may say, it's just like the email address, it's going to take you to parts unknown. Slide, please. What happens after you click the link? And that's what I'm going to discuss next, is how a cyber operation progresses. And what really happens after you click on that link depends on your adversary and their intentions. Now, phishing isn't the only way to have your network impacted, but it's one of the most common ways. Cyber incidents escalate in severity over time. intrusions via phishing, social engineering, weak passwords, compromise, and create access. In advance of the cyber operation, reconnaissance, surveillance, and is conducted by your adversary. Now, in the case of a financial institution, you might have a very specific research done on your organization that obviously this is a financial institution. Who are your executives? A lot of them have public profiles either on the website or on LinkedIn or other social media. That you have vendors and other companies that you do a lot of business with. And this allows adversaries to identify who to target best. Now, separately, a lot of other phishing campaigns are just blasted out in mass, and that everyone gets them. And they're just, again, creating that action imperative where you click on the link and allow them into your system. But after that initial compromise, however it comes, what happens next depends on who your adversary is. The first thing they're going to want to do is establish a foothold inside your network. They're going to download additional malware. They're going to create backdoors into your system, and they're going to bring in software that allows them to harvest credentials and escalate their privileges. Ideally, they're going to want to get to that administration level, which is going to allow them to create their own fake accounts and be able to sustain themselves in your system, even if their initial penetration is identified, or that later on the vulnerability they use to access your network has been patched. Once they've escalated those privileges, they're going to do their internal reconnaissance. They're going to figure out how your network is laid out, what is important in your network, what are the important data sets, whether that's PII, intellectual property, financial accounts. They're also going to want to find out where your backups are. Are they accessible online? And your adversary is going to want to delete or corrupt those first to be able to better leverage you later on when they finally announce their presence. Once they've conducted their internal reconnaissance and they've harvested the appropriate credentials, they're going to move laterally across your network. And again, continue the same process where they're going to expand their presence. They're going to put in additional back. They're going to, again, survey the landscape. How is your network set up? What's important? What's worth stealing? And then they're going to start doing that. They're going to exfiltrate that data that they came for. They're going to push it out to cloud services and prepare for to announce their presence. Now, the speed at which this life cycle occurs depends on who has penetrated your network. If it is an organized crime group or ransomware group who's financially motivated, this cycle will probably last a very short time. They're going to move through this process quickly. They're going to exfiltrate your data, and they're going to announce their presence through the encryption of critical data on your network and the ransom note. Now, if it's a nation state actor and their purposes is more for reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, and establishing and maintaining strategic surprise, the ability to do something dramatic later at their time of their choosing, well, this life cycle could be very slow. They could move very methodically through your network to ensure that they are not observed or identified as being present. And they're going to, again, expand their presence, and they're going to wait. They're going to collect additional data, and they're going to wait for a time of their choosing to announce their presence. Again, either through encryption, through wiping procedures, which is what occurred at the beginning of the current Ukrainian war. And then when they announce their presence, that's when the extortion begins. And initially ransomware began with the encryption of critical data, and then a true extortion of the negotiation of the price to receive the encryption key. As cybersecurity professionals, cybersecurity best practices evolved, that negotiation has changed, and that companies got better at employing cyber hygiene, protecting their backups, better at restoring their backups. And so now companies were not paying the ransom as often, and the numbers were not as high because victims had more options. Well, that led to what we now call double and triple extortion, where ransomware actors have actually cut back on just the encryption, and they've just focused on the exfiltration of data and threatening to post your critical data online where it can be viewed by competitors or other actors. And they are extorting to have that either not posted or to have it removed once it is posted. And then separately, we have what is termed double and triple extortion, where in addition to extorting you to have that data removed from public space, is that they are contacting your customers and they're contacting your employees and again, extorting them with threats, either to publish their data or to threats of violence against employees. Failing to implement and follow, back up just one second. Failing to implement and follow cybersecurity standards and controls to include unpatched vulnerabilities and insufficient defense and depth strategies create opportunities for adversaries to move through your networks, expanding their presence, enabling data exfiltration, and extorting you. For every organization, profit or nonprofit, public sector or private, cyber risk is business risk. Next, please. I would like to provide you now with some explanation of the difference between exploited vulnerabilities and 0 days. On the slide here, this is an opportunity I have to highlight the important work of other government partners in the cybersecurity space, in this case, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. CISA is the common publishing point of all of the cybersecurity information gathered by the various arms of the federal government to be published out to companies both before and after victimization to help harden their target. In this particular page on the CISA website is the Known Vulnerabilities Catalog. A known vulnerability is pretty much self-explanatory. Law enforcement and U.S. government partners have documented these flaws in software and networking and have documented the use of them by cyber actors to attack victim networks. A 0-day exploit is just the opposite. It's a flaw we have yet to observe. As such, cyber researchers and software developers have yet to begin on a solution to the patch. When I prepared this presentation last month, there on the CISA webpage for known exploited vulnerabilities, there were 832 entries. That means there are 832 known, documented different ways that law enforcement has seen cyber actors attack networks. And this highlights the importance of keeping your systems up to date, patching vulnerabilities, updating your software and your hardware, because you don't need a 0-day to exploit your network when you haven't patched all the known vulnerabilities. Slide, please. And this is just, a quick little meme to highlight the importance of that cybersecurity is not just meeting just the letter of the law, but also the spirit of the law. And that when in this example here, it doesn't do you any good to just make the smallest change possible to your password to keep your network secure. And it's true whether it's changing your password or updating your cybersecurity principles, that it's important to keep up with the spirit of cybersecurity and not just doing the bare minimum. Next, I would like to introduce Steve Curran from the Department of the Treasury to talk about preparedness and response.
Steve, can you unmute?
I'm very sorry. Yes, I was on mute. It was a very good introduction for those that you missed it. But I do want to start by thanking everyone that's joined the webinar today. I'm Steve Curran with the U.S. Department of the Treasury, Office of Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Protection. Wanted to thank Ncua for sponsoring the webinar and also for all of you that have come and taken time out of your day to join us. I think this is a very important topic, and want to start off by talking a little bit about our organization at Treasury, what we do, and why we think this is important, why we think this is something that people really need to know about. I want to talk about some of the unique challenges of ransomware. Why is ransomware different than just any other type of cyber attack, and why does that affect you and how you prepare for and respond to ransomware? Then we've done some work, and I'll talk about this in a bit, to look at organizations that respond successfully to ransomware incidents and some of the key characteristics or practices they employ that help them in that. So I'll run through a few of those at the high level, and then I want to get into a little bit in the detail on incident response. What will happen when there is a cyber incident? Who do you talk to? And then what are the expectations you can have of the federal government as we work with private sector owners and operators to respond to ransomware incidents? First, as I mentioned, I'm with the Office of Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Protection here at the Department of the Treasury. We're the part of Treasury that looks at operational risks to the financial services sector, meaning what are those things that can happen to financial services, to organizations that might impact their ability to do business. They may impact the ability of customers or members of financial institutions to receive the services that they expect and create national level effects. And we're there to work with industry. We're there to work also with government partners in a collaborative way to identify what the challenges are, share information about them, make sure everyone's informed of what the biggest threats are out there, do analysis on that. We'll do exercises with our partners, and we'll also help coordinate the response to cyber incidents as they happen. As I said, we work very closely with industry, and that includes a wide range of industry, from credit unions and banks to payment processors, insurance providers, and really the whole gamut. And on the federal side, we work with federal government agencies as well as state agencies. We work with regulators, really to bring everyone together who talks to industry and make sure we have a unified voice. And we're coming up with creative solutions together about how we can better advance resilience policy for critical infrastructure and how we can help those who are really managing the day-to-day operations of our infrastructure out here in our country. We can go to the next slide, please. Ransomware is one of those challenges that's very important to us. And one reason for that is because of how disruptive ransomware is. When you look at other types of cyber attacks, they're certainly very disruptive and very important. Data breaches, denial of service attacks, I could run through the list, and all those present their unique challenges. There is something about ransomware that is unique, and I think one way to think about it is to go back to Ted's presentation and think about what would you do and how would you feel if you got one of those notices saying that your computer had been compromised, your network had been compromised, that a ransom was being demanded of you, that a criminal actor had hold of your information and really you had no control over what they did with it. They had control over your customer information, the reputation of your business, your member information would be in there. And really they're dangling something out there, which is what looks like the quick fix is pay us a ransom and all these fears can go away. Ransomware is successful in large part because it relies on fear, and fear is a great motivator for getting someone to do what you want them to do. It creates a ticking clock scenario for someone that sees that they have to make some very significant decisions that affect their business, that affect their customers in a very short period of time, with the potential for consequences that could be very high, that can be even be existential consequences for an organization that just can't recover from this type of incident. So that's something that makes it very challenging for organizations to respond to make those types of decisions nimbly in the event of a crisis, in a crisis mode, is very, very difficult. It's also not just as easy, I put that in quotes, as just paying the ransom. There's sometimes a thought, well, if we pay the ransom, maybe the ransom is insured, so it's not going to be something that we completely take out of hide for that. That's a solution to ransomware. And I think most people understand that that's not a solution, but let me just explain a couple aspects of that. First, any payment of ransom unintentionally does incentivize the future conduct of criminal activity. By paying a ransom, you not only subject other organizations potentially to this type of criminal activity because that activity is financed, they realize it can be successful, but in many ways it can also subject your own organization to future attacks. If you're seen as an organization that will pay, there have been times when that's been seen as an incentive to attack again. And unless your systems are patched, there's nothing to stop an actor from continuing to attack an organization that has been attacked in the past. The second part is that there's no assurance that when you pay this criminal actor to supposedly unencrypt your files, that will actually happen, and that will actually happen in the time frame in which you need it to prevent very serious disruption to your operations. And when Ted talks about double and triple extortion attacks, you have to trust that when you pay that ransom, that cyber criminal is going to give you all the data back and not release it at some point later, or try to re-extort you, that they're going to release the data at some point in the future. So just paying that ransom is not necessarily effective, even if they give you a decryption key that works. It may take a significant amount of time for that to work, and therefore it's not something you can rely on as part of your response strategy. So what I want to talk about is on the next slide, what the conclusion that sort of leads to. And it's not the conclusion that people necessarily want to hear, and I wouldn't want to hear after they've experienced a ransomware attack. And that's really that it's much better to prepare for this type of incident than to respond to it. You're put in a very bad position when you're responding. And sometimes there are very limited good choices that you can make at that point. The good choices you can make happen before the incident. Also, if you are in the unfortunate case where you've done everything you can to protect your systems, you've put the right practices in place, still you can be hit with ransomware, and that's an unfortunate fact. However, those that are prepared for that have thought through that know what they're going to do to respond to that, are going to be much more successful than those for which this is something that they hadn't thought about, that they hadn't planned for, and as I'll talk about later, that they haven't exercised and really gone through the steps of how they would respond. So one thing that we did as an organization with U.S. Treasury, Department of Treasury, we worked with our international counterparts through the G7. And as you may know, the G7 is the group of 7 large industrialized democracies that meets to coordinate on defense issues as well as economic issues. And recognizing this was a significant issue for financial services, ransomware was, we formed a work stream under our cyber expert group that's under the G7 to look at this issue and to better understand what are some of the common things we're observing in all these G7 countries that are critical to financial services entities preparing for and responding to ransomware. And we've come down with a few, and that's what I want to run through in the following slides, some of the findings of what we've come out with that I think will help guide at a high level what an organization can do to start planning for and thinking about this. One caveat, this is not going to necessarily go into specific technical controls, implement this, implement that. Technology changes, and it's hard to pin those down in a way that you'll know that you'll be safe tomorrow with the advice I gave you today. But hopefully this will give you a start in how to think about this from a management perspective within your credit union or whatever organization that you're in. First is recognize that everything you do for ransomware needs to rely on the basics of a sound cybersecurity program within your organization. And for most organizations, that means the establishment of a cybersecurity strategy and a cybersecurity framework. Most organizations will have this in some way in their organization. There are a number of cybersecurity frameworks out there that can be used. The important thing is to pick one and stick with one. The National Institute for Standards and Technology has the National Cybersecurity Framework, which is one that many organizations use, but really there are many options out there. But really the important thing is to know what that is and to make sure that's being implemented in the organization. Now, for many smaller organizations, you may outsource your IT services to a third party. You may not be running your own networks. You may not be running your own cybersecurity. In any event, it's still very important to know from those third party vendors what frameworks they have, what strategies they have in place, what is their approach to protecting your data and your systems from the third party perspective. There are a lot of resources out there that you can look at to how to establish a cybersecurity program or how to improve your cybersecurity program, and specifically how to work within your cybersecurity strategy and framework for ransomware. One site that I'd like to talk about just up front, but I'll show the link later on in the presentation in case you aren't able to jot that down, is www.stopransomware.gov. That is the federal government's one-stop shop for ransomware related information. So it has information from the Department of Homeland Security, has it from our law enforcement partners, from the intelligence community. Everything that can be shared publicly is in that site, and really, I think, well organized in the way that you can find from high-level guidance to more specific information you may need about ransomware. And the second is please see Ncua as a resource as well. Ncua is very tied in with the work that we do at the Department of the Treasury. They're one of those governmental partners I talked about that we work with day in and day out on these issues. And when we have an issue like ransomware that's very important to us, we will certainly work through those organizations that have that broad reach, that can reach the credit unions across the country and spread the information that needs to be spread. So please do look at Ncua and similar organizations you may be part of as a source for that information. Next slide, please. The next thing is that organizations are effective in their cybersecurity and in defending against ransomware have sound and established governance structures for cybersecurity. They know who calls the shots for cybersecurity within their organization, and it's not siloed within that IT department. It's something that has board level or CEO level attention. The leadership throughout the organization is engaged in cybersecurity. And that would include all divisions of the organization that really are not information technology focused, but play a role, use IT systems, maybe have a public affairs or legal role. They all need to be part of that governance structure to make sure that they see their place in the cybersecurity of the organization. When you have that together, when you have that structure and you're talking about cybersecurity at a high leadership level in an organization, you can start to address some of those key questions that inevitably come up with a ransomware incident. And some of those are the ones I have listed here. And I think the one that jumps to most people's mind is, what would I do if I'm all of a sudden hit with a ransom demand? What do I do? And that's a question that your IT department is not going to be able to answer for you. There'll be, general counsel maybe has some thoughts on that. Finance has some thoughts on that. Public affairs may have some thoughts on that. It's a question that really needs to be addressed at the organizational level and thought through in a way before any kind of demand is actually received. How will business operations be maintained? Again, not necessarily just an information technology issue. They're working to bring the information technology backbone of the organization back up online after a ransomware incident. Well, the rest of the organization may need to be working on working in an IT deprived environment for a certain period of time until they can get back up and running. And you don't want your organization at a standstill until the IT gets back up. So how do you continue business operations in that sort of IT degraded environment? How will you communicate to stakeholders? Who are the stakeholders? What will the public think of this? What will the public think if they see that your services are down, perhaps indefinitely? What will that do to your members, your customers? How will outside organizations be engaged? Think about, the response to a ransomware incident can't, for most organizations, can't just lie within that organization themselves. They usually need help from others. And that needs to be plotted out in advance, and those relationships need to be made in advance. Who are you going to call when this type of incident happens? And finally, one that I think is an important one to mention is look at your insurance posture with respect to ransomware. What coverage might you have, either in cyber-specific policies, which is where you're probably going to find it, especially increasingly most ransomware type coverage is limited more to the cyber policies, but it may be in other policies the organization has as well. And that's important to know because that may have some ramifications for how you respond, which I'll talk about in a moment. Next slide, please. Then you want to assess the risk of ransomware and look at what controls you have to mitigate that risk. And when I say controls, these are those technical things that you put in place to make sure that either adversaries can't get in, or if they get in, that you're able to stop them somehow. And there are things like multi-factor authentication, that you don't just sign in with a password, you sign in with a password plus a PIN they send to your email or your cell phone, or a token, those types of things, which can drastically reduce your risk. There are specific controls for ransomware. In other words, usually these are things that could work for a number of different cyber scenarios, but in particular, adversaries use them for ransomware attacks. And Ted talked about a number of those vulnerabilities that CISA lists, which are really a great place to go first, because we know adversaries are exploiting those actively. Those aren't just the theoretical ones. Those are the ones being exploited. A few other places to look. You can, of course, look at stopransomware.gov. Again, Ncua has some good controls related to ransomware on the website. Also, CISA, in addition to having these cybersecurity controls, they do have, or cybersecurity vulnerability listings. They do, for some companies, and they have to be accepted into this program, the ability to do scanning. So remote scanning of an individual organizational network from the outside, not intruding into anything in the system, but everything that you can just see on the public internet, which helps companies get a little bit of a better sense what's being seen about my network from the outside and what vulnerabilities are really obvious to someone that might be attacking me. Again, all the data are kept confidential, but it's a good way to get a third eye on your systems. Next slide, please. Of course, you want to act, once you've got these plans and systems in place, it's very important to monitor actively for threats as they're coming in. There are automated systems to do this, but also you want to encourage vigilance by all of your employees to be on the lookout for this and monitor those threat trends that may impact your organization. Next slide. When we respond, response needs to be a holistic response across your organization. It should be according to response structures that have been established in the past and significantly also exercised in the past. Walk through this either through a tabletop exercise where we just talk about what we do during this type of scenario, but even go through the motions in a functional exercise to talk about how you would actually respond and look at who you also would include in terms of your outside partners in that response. Next slide, please. You'll also have to worry about recovery of your systems. Ted had mentioned that ransomware attackers will often go after the data backups. So just having a data backup is not necessarily a protection against ransomware. There are backup strategies that may make you more likely to be resilient in a ransomware attack, where you have multiple copies of backups that go at multiple points in time that you can go back to. And there are people that can help you put that together, but just recognize that you have to have a ransomware resilient or resistant backup strategy and to test those backups before an incident. It's very notoriously challenging to recover data, especially at scale during an incident. It takes time and it takes care to do that. So it's always best to practice that and make sure you can really do that when you need to. Next slide, please. Information training, there's just a lot of information out there on ransomware and what to do. Again, Ncua, other relevant trade associations have a lot of good materials on this. It's always good to just stay on top of what the current threat trends are. They do change their tactics, and it's always good to change along with them. When you do have an incident, it's also important to share with others. Other organizations may be impacted by something similar with law enforcement, but also there may be regulatory reporting requirements, which I won't necessarily speak to, but please be aware there may be regulatory requirements that happen where you might be required to share information after a breach. Next slide, please. And continuous learning, the tactics continue to change, and we need to change with them. So organizations that are successful do continually try to improve their systems and adjust as they see new threat trends on the way. And next slide, please. I'll try to go through this fairly quickly. I notice that I'm a little bit long on time here. When you do have an incident, it's very important to think about who you're going to report to and establish that relationship with those individuals in advance. Law enforcement is one of your key partners in this, and really is going to be one of the first, if not the first, phone call that you'll want to make. These are criminal activities. These are criminal events, and they really need the law enforcement authorities to come in and to manage that. And usually that's at the federal level for these cyber incidents. There are also agencies, other federal agencies that are very involved in response. That includes Treasury, Department of Homeland Security, CISA I mentioned. And then one other partner I just want to flag for those that, to make sure you think about this as well, your insurer. If you do have cyber insurance, please do look at the requirements. Some insurers do require very quick or timely notification of the insurer so that you can be covered for the ransomware. Also, contacting your insurer may open the door to other response resources that they could set you up with that can help you in response. So that should be part of that early Rolodex of people to call. And then next slide, please. At the federal level, there are multiple organizations or entities that will be working on response. That's all governed under the National Cyber Incident Response Plan. At a very high level, what that plan does is break out some roles and responsibilities. So, and in that we have three areas: it's threat response, asset response, and intelligence support. Intelligence support is the Office of Director of National Intelligence. That's probably stuff you won't see. It's behind the scenes, sharing intelligence information related to an incident. Department of Justice, of course, leads often or usually through the FBI, the investigation of a ransomware incident, and that would be their primary focus. Department of Homeland Security has responsibility for what's called the asset response. That means helping organizations that may need help in recovering their systems. Now, please keep in mind, ransomware attacks are fairly common these days, and there are limited resources to provide every organization that may need some help in this area. But for those issues that do reach a nationally significant level, this plan will activate and those types of services may be available. I think more importantly is if you do have something that's a national scale event, you'll see Department of Homeland Security very active in spreading information about how to protect your systems. And then U.S. Department of Treasury will be right along there with them and taking the parts out that would be very specific to financial services and spreading those with our partners. So that'll be a very active role we play and something that you can look for when there's something that may be a larger scale incident. Next slide, please. So key takeaways, I just wanted to show those websites I mentioned before. Please, always plan and exercise in advance. There's really no substitute for that. And when you have an incident, reach out early to your partners in the law enforcement. I think the last thing just to say is that the time to start responding to a ransomware incident is not when you have one. It really is right after this webinar, or go sleep on it and tomorrow morning. As soon as you can get into at least something to talk to people within your organization about what you would do in these scenarios, that will really pay off huge dividends if you ever had that type of attack. So thank you very much for your time. I will turn the presentation over to Tom Theune.
Thanks so much, Steve. I appreciate it. I also want to echo Steve in thanking Ncua for putting on this webinar and all of our attendees who have given up their time to listen to us today. My name is Tom Theune, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Wisconsin Department of Financial Institutions, the Office of Credit Unions. I'm so pleased to be a part of this panel today. I can't tell you. I've been discussing ransomware with the credit union industry as a regulator for over 8 years now. And before that, I worked in natural person credit unions for 30 years in a variety of managerial roles, including CEO and information security. And I have to say, this is the very first time I've been on a panel with the FBI and Treasury, and it's really kind of cool. I hope you enjoyed their presentations, Ted and Steve's. I found them very interesting, and I'm sure you did too. My portion of this presentation is going to focus on how our department has educated our credit union boards, management, and staff regarding the dangers presented by ransomware, and offering controls that will help mitigate the infection of the malware. Next slide, please. I'm going to begin my presentation by showing some actual ransomware screens that I've collected over the years. I'll then discuss how our department has worked to educate the credit union community regarding ransomware and how our examination scope has progressed over that same time period. Our aim was to broaden our information technology reviews to assist our state's credit unions in strengthening their information security programs. Finally, I'll discuss the steps that every institution can take to help mitigate the effects of ransomware in their credit union. Before I get started, I'd like to start by showing a short video that was put together by Ncua using the slides of the ransomware that I've used on multiple presentations.
This screenshot is the first example I used of a ransomware screen that I found when I was researching for my first presentation on cybersecurity for a credit union group in 2014. This ransomware purports to be a penalty for pirating software and claims the ransom is a fine for that pirating. This slide is a screenshot of an older attack and claims to be from federal agencies blocking your computer because of a pornographic content that's stored on the hard drive. This ransomware is prior to the use of Bitcoin and wants the victim to purchase a money pack from any number of big retailers listed on the screen. The following two screenshots show examples of CryptoLocker ransomware, an early example of ransomware as a service, where the developer of the malware will lease out its ransomware and its control structure to other cyber criminals. When a visitor went to the CryptoLocker service site, they were presented with an explanation page that contained information about ransomware as a service and how users could sign up for this service. The page explained how the service or malware worked and what the buyer's responsibilities were and how much the service would cost. This screenshot is from the Wannacry ransomware attack that turned into a global epidemic in 2017. Were it not for the continued use of outdated computer systems and poor education around the need to update software, this attack could have been avoided. Wannacry did not rely on phishing campaign, but on the weakness in the Windows operating system, which actually could have been patched 2 months before the attack. This is a ransomware attack called Snatch from 2019, in which the ransomware executable forces the Windows machine to reboot into safe mode before beginning the encryption process. A quote from Sophos Labs states, "The severity of the risk posed by ransomware, which runs in safe mode, cannot be overstated. This is because most software, including security software, does not run in the safe mode environment." And this is one of my favorite examples of how ransomware attempts to instill fright into its victims. If you've ever seen any of the Saw movies, you will recognize this image immediately, and seeing this appear on my computer screen would definitely give me the creeps.
Thanks. I want to take a quick moment here and give a shout out to Ron Good from the Ncua for putting together that video for us. I really appreciate it, Ron. Thank you. And interestingly enough, an email came into my inbox just the other day regarding the negative psychological effect of ransomware on the victims. It occurred to me while watching this video that the last slide would certainly play into that for sure. And that slide would definitely have a negative psychological effect on me. So all of these slides are examples of how ransomware has changed and advanced over the years. And now I'd like to take an opportunity to look at how our education and exam process has evolved over that same period. When I first began with the Office of Credit Unions in 2014, I began doing cybersecurity presentations. And that very first screenshot that you saw in the video, I used in my very first presentation to a credit union group. And I included it more as an item of interest, maybe a curiosity, but not so much as a serious threat. It created a lot of discussion. People were interested in it, but nobody really thought that this was a threat to their credit unions at that time. And yet you can see from the video that ransomware progressed throughout the years. So our training was developed and we pushed it out to staff now. Management and board of directors as the threat of this ransomware continued to grow. Finally, new variants are coming out. Ransomware is not going away. We realized we needed to step up and increase our presentations. So we were talking about ransomware and delivered speeches to credit union chapters, multiple CU roundtables, board of directors training sessions, other regulators, and credit union league conferences. Basically, anyone that would have me, I would stand up and talk about ransomware. I wanted to create the discussions in the credit unions regarding this malware and the serious effect it could have on credit unions. Next slide, please. Finally, we decided we needed to push our education efforts back into the credit union and have them address their staff directly. We began to start having conversations with credit unions during our exams and encourage them to expand the frequency and robustness of their educational offerings to their staff. They needed to make their staff understand what an important piece they were in the cybersecurity culture at their credit union. So we talked to them about it. We worked with them. We asked what they were doing now. We reviewed their processes. And then we started talking to them about how often they were testing these educational programs. They needed to understand that without those tests, they did not know the effectiveness of their training program. They had to be able to score, if you will, their staff's response to phishing emails or any kind of baiting that may happen in their credit union. Whatever they were training on, they needed to understand the response that they were getting from their staff. Along with it, at that point, we began to talk about password security to our credit unions. When we first started talking about them, I would say the base password length was 6 characters. Well, we all know that's not going to cut it anymore. And so we started encouraging credit unions to push for longer password lengths. And then we started to ask them to push for complex passwords using symbols, using numbers, using letters, not having consecutive letters, not using dictionary words. And then we started talking to them about using passphrases as opposed to passwords. As the length and complexity of passwords increase, passphrases are easier to remember. And so the staff are not going to have to write it down. My next slide, please. Okay, I've talked a little bit about how our training has increased and changed over the course of the ransomware's life, and how ransomware became a larger part of our presentations during this time period. Not only did the frequency of our speaking engagements increase, but we did increase the emphasis on internal training to our credit unions. But I'd like to show how our information security exam scope progressed during this period as well. So back to 2014, Wisconsin had 160 credit unions during that time, and we had 1 IT examiner. They set their own schedule. There wasn't any regular exam scope. Staff education was not a priority at these exams. So obviously, I mean, it says to you that cybersecurity was not a significant portion of the exams we were doing in our state. That got worse in 2015 when our IT examiner resigned and we didn't have anybody. At that point, our agency decided the best way to proceed was to create a new exam scope that would occur every time we went out, and something that we could train all of our frontline examiners on and let every single person be able to go out and do an IT exam or information security exam and make it a regular part of every exam when we hit the ground out there. Next slide, please. In 2016, we actually launched this program. We created a new exam scope and began training our frontline examiners. And I have to say, they did a wonderful job at that time. A lot of them had no experience at all, but we worked hard and developed a good scope that they understood and could communicate with the credit unions. Some of the scope that we did include at that time is still in process. We still use it. And some of those pieces were discussed in prior presentations, but are still an important part of us at our exam process at credit unions, such as the review of the backup process. How often and how are backups completed at the credit union? When and how often are they tested for accuracy and recoverability? Email filtering. Is there a process in place to detect malware at the gateway on the network? Safe browsing lists. Does the credit union restrict access to websites that are only needed for work, or do they allow unrestricted browsing? Software patching schedules. Is all of our software patched on a regular schedule, and is the patching level monitored? Antivirus and anti-malware. Is the software deployed? Are the signatures updated on a frequent basis? Are all the machines up to date? Strong password requirements. We already talked a little bit about that. But what is the password policy at the credit union? And is it enforced? And are complexity standards required? The incident response plan and testing. Is a strong incident response plan in place that identifies incidents and recovery procedures to take during an attack? Will the staff know what to do when they're faced with a ransomware screen? And I want to reiterate a little bit here at this point, something that Steve mentioned in his presentation about the communication and notification procedures in the response plans. Are you notifying law enforcement? And are you notifying your regulators? This should be an important part of everybody's response plan. Next slide, please. So as we progressed into 2017, we increased the review process of the training and testing programs that were occurring at the credit union. In 2021, an interesting thing came along, the Ncua Cybersecurity Examination Tool. We began using that tool in 2021, which included a lot of the scope of our exam process. But the goal with that was to provide consistency with the Ncua examinations. So no matter who was doing the exam or the security exam, if it was a joint process, that credit union was getting the same exam as if we had gone in by ourselves. Now 2022 is here, and we are working and testing a new process with Ncua called their Information Security Exam Tool, or ICE. I believe it's looking to be released next year, but we've been testing it for the better part of 2022. It has a lot of the same features as the cybersecurity exams tool, but it is very scalable to the size of the credit union. Plus, it can be used in a risk-focused process. So keep your eye out for that. I think it's a great tool, and it can be pushed and used by the frontline staff on every single exam that is occurring in your state or in your federal charter. Next slide, please. Now, mitigation steps. I wanted to talk and reiterate again something Steve said earlier, was that a lot of these are not set in stone. It's going to depend on your credit union, your own risk profile, and how the entire threat area has evolved over the years. But keep in mind that each credit union should implement a cybersecurity program that's proportionate to its resources and its identified risk. I recognize that implementing some controls is more challenging for smaller credit unions, but failing to do so may ultimately result in greater losses, as the smaller credit unions may be more frequent targets for ransomware and other cyber crimes because they're more vulnerable. So email filtering. Use email filtering at the gateway to allow file types that you would expect to receive at your institution, and block malicious emails and remove executable attachments. Along with email filtering, use the whitelist to limit the sites that can be accessed from within the credit union. Social engineering training. Recurrent phishing training, including how to spot, avoid, and report phishing attempts. Ted had a great area in his presentation regarding phishing. And it was a great couple of slides to show how to recognize a phishing email. Vulnerability and patch management. Credit unions should have a documented program to identify, assess, track, and remediate vulnerabilities on all assets within their network. Timely remediation of all vulnerabilities is essential and requires strong governance, including assignment and tracking responsibilities. We will look for that every time we go into a credit union. Who's responsible for correcting the vulnerabilities that are discovered, and how far along are they in that correction process? Multi-factor authentication. MFA protects user accounts and can prevent hackers from obtaining access to the network and from escalating privileges once they are in the network. All logins to privileged accounts, whether remote or internal, should require MFA, as this is a highly effective way of blocking the privileged escalation. Here's password management again. Privileged user accounts should require passwords of at least 16 characters and ban commonly used passwords. Privileged access management. Now, all credit unions should implement the principle of least privilege access. Each user or service account should be given the minimum level of necessary to perform the required job duties. Credit unions should also maintain and periodically audit inventory of all privileged accounts. Administrators should also have a second non-privileged account for all other tasks, such as logging into their workstation, email, creating documents, whatever. The monitoring and response programs. There should be a way to monitor the credit union systems for intruders and respond to alerts of suspicious activity. What this is should be determined by the size and complexity of the institution and the risk profile of the credit union. For example, a smaller credit union may limit what is logged and then be able to review those logs in-house, while a larger credit union may deploy a security information and event management solutions, centralizing the logging process and security event alerting. Testing and segregated backups. Segregated backups are not connected to the network, and this provides digital protection against viruses, malware, and hackers. Before restoring from a backup, verify that it's free from any malware. You should only restore from a backup if you are very confident that the backup and the device you're connecting to is clean. And then finally, just testing these controls. It doesn't serve any purpose to create a bunch of controls within your credit union and not be confident that they're doing what you expect them to do. You have to have a system of tests every year and document those tests and report it to your board of directors. Next slide, please. My takeaways here. The tasks keep evolving, and so the credit union's security must continue to evolve as well. And I have to say, the regulatory agency's exam scope has to evolve along with it. We cannot just rest and think we're doing a great job. We have to provide more to our credit unions. Communication is a key factor in attempting to stop the spread of ransomware. Just notifying us 3 or 4 weeks after you were hit isn't enough. We need to know right away. We will not be able to judge whether the seriousness of a situation if we aren't notified as soon as we can be. I have to say that I have taken part in a number of tabletop exercises with the Treasury Department over the past few years. And the one piece that has always bothered me is that our agency is so relying on the communication from our credit unions as to what is going on. If we're not receiving that communication, we are running blind. We don't know. We can't warn anybody. We can't do anything. So you have to consider communication to your regulatory agency and to law enforcement. Test your controls. Do not get caught short. Know what your controls will do. And finally, train, and more training. Train your staff, train your board, train your management, and if you have to, train your third parties. continue training and offer robust and different types of it. People learn in different ways. So make sure you are offering different training opportunities for everybody. Finally, I just want to make sure that everybody works to create that strong culture of cybersecurity within their credit union and keep your information safe and secure. That's it. Thank you. Catherine.
Thank you, Tom. We really appreciate it. We've had a lot of information, everybody. So hopefully you're really paying attention because we have a final polling question. But before Franz puts it up, I want you to take a look at it here on screen. So, how can you see yourself in cyber and keep your shields up against malicious actors? So now, were you paying attention? Let's see how you do with the polling question. Franz, let's put the polling question up and see what our audience has to say. Let's see what they have to say. So if you could put that last polling question up that says, how can you see yourself in cyber and keep your shields up against malicious actors? Here it is. Okay, everyone. So use the radio buttons on your screen, please. And how can you see yourself in cyber and keep your shields up against malicious actors? A, think before you click, recognize and report phishing. B, trust all emails received from your work email or from a friend are safe. C, use multi-factor authentication when possible. D, if you must use a password, make them complex with a mixture of upper, lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols, and don't reuse passwords for multiple applications or services. E, keep your software up to date. F, don't turn on the automatic update software feature. G, be careful of the programs you install on your computer or the USB drives you use. H, A, C, D, E, and G are good practices of cyber hygiene. Or I, all of the above are good practices for cyber hygiene. One good answer. Let's see how much everyone was paying attention. I'm not going to read those again. It might take me all day. So, thank you, Franz. The majority of our audience got the question right, H. That is the correct answer. A, C, D, E, and G are good examples of cyber hygiene. Thank you so much to our speakers today. Let's go back to our presentation briefly so that we can get our office contact information. Here at Ncua, we have a cybersecurity resources webpage at ncua.gov. And also, if you have any questions related to cybersecurity, you can email those to enimail@ncua.gov. Here's what the page looks like on ncua.gov. You'd go to the home, regulation and supervision, regulatory and compliance resources, and there's the cybersecurity resources page. It is jam-packed with information. You will definitely benefit from it, like all of our speakers have said. And here's our CURE, the Office of Credit Union Resources and Expansion contact information. And now we've come to that time in our webinar where we're going to do our Q&A. So I'm going to turn it over to Ernest Chambers, or Ernie. He's going to lead us with that. And Franz, would you also, well, we don't need to do it this time, I'm sorry. We're also going to send everyone a survey at the end of the webinar. Please fill it out. We'd like to have your opinion of how you felt this webinar went and if it fulfilled your needs. So I'm going to turn this over to Ernie. Ernie, you have the floor.
Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate it. Ted from the FBI, Mr. Curran from OSIP or U.S. Treasury, and Mr. Theune. Just fantastic information and the way it was presented. We got to take this show on the road. You guys did a phenomenal job. So we've got some questions, many that you would expect. So there will be some clarifications here from the audience, as well as some new and might I say even innovative approaches that folks are looking for in the credit union ecosystem. And I think you'll be obliged to answer. Starting with that, and one that I fully expected is, and it's to the three of you, what would a credit union or an institution do once attacked, and as demands are made in an X number of hours for a for payment? How should they look to handle that particular incident? Steve, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I'm happy to start out. I think, the first thing I think to say is that, in the best case scenario, you have an incident response plan where this wouldn't be a new scenario to you, where it's something that you'd be able to look at. What's your plan and how would you go through it? As we all mentioned earlier, some of your first calls would be to law enforcement, to anyone who's managing cybersecurity services for your organization, which could be an external party, your cyber insurance provider, who may have resources to provide to you. One thing I should mention, that part of the question is about the time. If someone says that you need to give me a ransom within 4 hours, what does that mean? I need to get back in 4 hours. Recognize also that some of the services that are out there to help organizations through these types of events, there are people that respond to these incidents. There are what are called breach coaches that help organizations that have been hit by a breach. Sometimes the insurance companies can put you in contact with them, others can put you in contact with them. There are people that are experienced with working with these ransomware actors. It doesn't mean they're paying the ransom, but it does help to talk to them or have someone who's experienced talk to them, and keep them talking, and see how much that timeline can be pushed out as you're making up your working through your response and deciding what it is that you can do as an organization. So I think just don't take those timelines as complete ultimatums, and recognize there are people that have been through this before that can help you navigate that process.
Fantastic. Ted?
Thank you. I would agree with Steve 100%, is that in an ideal world, and not even an ideal world, and just industry standard, is you're going to follow your incident response plan. This is foreseeable that this could happen to you, that you're going to have an incident response plan. If you don't have an incident response plan, when it's over, you're going to have an even bigger problem from a variety of people. Through that incident response plan, you are going to contact law enforcement. You're going to contact your cyber insurer. You're going to contact your cybersecurity professionals that you've already spoken with. You're going to contact your regulator. You're going to try and investigate where the incident came from and what have they actually gotten a hold of. The whole purpose of a ransom is to create urgency, to create anxiety, and that's just a natural inclination to want to end it as soon as possible. But again, you're going to investigate, do I have my backups? Can I restore my backups? Do I even need to pay this? Do they actually have what they say they have? Have they done what they have said they've done? And that, again, goes back to the plan, is that in the moment of panic, what you should do first, and how you can be confident of the answers that you're getting when you go through your process. You need to have had a thoughtful process in advance with all the players. It's something that can't be kept in the IT department. It can't be kept just in the bank. And so you're going to fall back to the level of your training and your planning. So if after this call, after you listen to Steve and Tom and myself, and you think to yourself, we don't really have a plan, or we haven't looked at it, or we haven't touched it in a year, that needs to be number one, what you're doing tomorrow. That this is, it's not a question these days of if or maybe, it's a question of when and how bad.
And Tom, if you could bring that home as you did so well in your presentations to our small, mid-size, and even larger credit unions, sir.
You bet. And I'll echo the other responses. It's going to rely on your incident response plan. And hopefully you've tested it. You know the capabilities of your plan. You've even discussed ransomware within your plan specifically. And your staff knows what to do when they're faced with that screen that pops up. If you do not have a plan, as Ted said, you should leave this webinar and start working on one immediately. And I guess that pretty much sums it all up.
Yes, sir. That definitely puts a fine point on it. With that, are there any observed time ranges one questioner, between initial access and the actual execution, or they said doing, of the ransomware, which I think would be the actual ransomware confirmation of the actual ransomware compromise. So are there any observed time frames that we have captured in trending? I'll toss that at you, Ted.
Well, yes. The FBI doesn't put out statistics on it, but I know a wide variety of cybersecurity researchers and companies put out statistics and provide presentations on this, and I would encourage you to seek those out. But the answer is alarmingly quick. As you saw the life cycle slide that I put up there, all those first steps, those are going to happen immediately. They're going to gain access. The first thing they're going to do is try and maintain access. They got their foot in their door, and they're going to do everything in their power to keep it open. How fast they move through it depends on who it is and why they're there. If they want money, they're going to go through it as fast as possible because this is a profit-oriented business. Time is money, and they want to achieve their objectives, get you over a barrel before you realize they're there, and they have the ability to do it in hours or minutes, depending on who you are and how your network is set up. And that goes back to how fast it is, and goes back to following of cybersecurity industry standards and controls. Is your network segmented? Do you have proper intrusion detection, intrusion protection in place? Have you deployed the idea of least privilege, defense in depth? That is going to slow them down. If you haven't done those things, much like the incident response plan answer from the previous question, if you haven't done those things, it's going to be minutes. If you've done those things, you're going to have a chance to slow them down and give your systems an opportunity to detect them and stop them before they get to something actually important.
Got it. Steve, would you like to, or Tom, for that matter, would you like to add anything to that?
Nothing to add. I think Ted covered it well.
Outstanding. Okay.
I think Ted had an excellent answer, although network monitoring is a solution that we've been struggling with our credit unions based on the size. The affordability of full network monitoring is difficult for some of the smaller credit unions. And how they actually review the log process has been difficult for us to have that conversation with them. You need to do this, but how can I do it? I can't afford it. It's a fine line to walk with these. That's why I mentioned that a lot of the smaller ones may have to identify specific logs that they want to keep. For instance, escalating to administrator level. If they have a user that shows up as an administrator that never was, I think it's a good signal that you've got a compromise on your network. So you can have that discussion with us if you're smaller credit unions, and we'll certainly be glad to talk through the whole process with you.
Fantastic. And this other question, actually, I'll give you guys a bit of a break, being a former Secret Service guy myself, and we get this question. Oftentimes, I'll also allow you an opportunity to chime in. But the question, when you contact law enforcement for the first step of an attack, is there a certain party to call opposed to 911? And then the person actually begs for forgiveness there. And I think it's appropriate to say that when an incident happens, that's not the time that you want to be reaching out. Of course, you want to reach out, but that's not the first time that you want to be reaching out to law enforcement. I encourage, there are ECTFs, electronic crimes task forces, in the various regions for the Secret Service. FBI has their field offices, and then even drilling down, Ted, please feel free to add not only your field offices, but you've got other smaller offices that deal specifically with them, but I don't want to call them outside of their name. I'm actually having a bit of I'm missing that characterization, but you can provide that proper naming. But suffice it to say, you don't want your at first instance of an incident to be the first time that you've talked to your law enforcement components. Building trust is so important, and communication. And these, I know, at least from the Secret Service side of the house, when I was there, they encouraged those kinds of engagements. And there are often activities ongoing that credit unions would do well to plug into. And this will answer one other question before I turn it back over to you all. We just published in the interagency, the FFIEC, the Education Council, just produced a cyber resources guide that covers everything from some best practices and free resources that you might avail yourself of, to include contact information into said law enforcement entities. With that, I'll actually, Ted, looks like you've got something to say, and then we'll move around the table.
Thank you, Ernie. You said it exactly right. Is in the FBI, we say you need to make that friend before you need that friend. And as part of the incident response plan, again, that answer is making those contacts with law enforcement, with your regulator, with Treasury, with CISA, with Secret Service, with FBI. We do have 56 field offices. We have 350 resident agencies. Every one of those 56 field offices has a cyber squad. Additionally, we have our CyWatch, which is our Cybersecurity Watch, which is sits back here in Cyber Division, 24 hours a day. It's manned. These are the people you should call, but mostly, Ernie, to your initial point, is that whoever you're calling, it shouldn't be a question. It should be, this is my contact in law enforcement who I've met before, who's come out to my, who's spoken to my staff, who's been to my field training exercise, been to my tabletop exercise. It's not a question of who to call at Treasury and OSIP or CISA or my state regulator. I've spoken to them all. I have their names written down. They're ready to go, and so I know what to do. So absolutely.
Fantastic, Stephen.
Thank you. I think that just echo those comments. It's early, you don't want to exchange business cards after the emergency. So please reach out, and it's always best to have those contacts in your regional area. And if you need help, of course, Treasury stands by to help navigate those contacts as you need them.
And then finally, sir, to put that fine point on it for our credit unions, Tom.
You got it. I have to say, I love Ted's response to that question. It was very eloquent and right on the money. The one thing I'll add is that regulators are not the enemy in situations like this. We are here to help. We will do whatever we can. We're not sitting back waiting to say, aha, I gotcha. We told you not to do that, but we want to be able to offer advice and direction, and we're here to help. So don't be afraid to contact your regulators.
Outstanding. There, one other addition besides the Cybersecurity Resources Guide, which for our listening audience, I think the last slide was pretty clear, but you can access those at ncua.gov, cybersecurity resources /cybersecurity resources. Great. Thank you, ma'am. Absolutely. All those resources are there for you, and we encourage you, please make use of said resources. Okay. Next question. Who do you recommend for automatic patching software? Don't want to go down the road of any endorsements, of course, and I think the disclaimer covered that, but might there be some recommendations on the automated or automatic patching software? Anyone? I'll just toss it out there for you all.
I'll take this one. And I don't mean to sidestep the question. I really would love to give you an answer for that. But kind of like Ernie, I don't really want to endorse anybody. The best people to ask for that question is other credit unions. Contact credit unions that are near you, ask them who they're using, get a number of names and talk to them yourselves, and then do your own due diligence as to what would be the best process for you to use.
I would like to say, just in echoing that, is that this is why you belong to your trade groups, your national associations, your ISACs. They have information on this. They have people dedicated to these types of questions. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd echo the same. I think it's hard to recommend individual companies. Just also recognize, for any automated patching, also to test your patches and make sure your systems still are functioning as expected after doing that patching.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just said something, Ted, and I would like to reinforce that. The Ncua ISAL, the ISAC, the FSISAC, what's the FBI resource that is often cited for those informal kinds of partnerships? They do a bunch of
Is it InfraGard?
InfraGard. That's exactly it. Being connected to those also can go a long way in helping to tap resources and at the state and local level. Outstanding. Got some long questions here. I'm not going to go with much in the way of the recommendations. I don't think those are appropriate for this particular environment, but I've got some others I'd like to go with. When migrating IT infrastructure to one of the major cloud providers, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, do you provide comprehensive anti-ransomware measures that can be contracted, or does that have to be done a la carte? And that's probably a service level agreement, and making sure you understand the folks you're about to get in bed with. But I'll toss that over to you, actually, Tom, to give some perspective on that question.
I think you hit that one very good, Ernie. That's going to be a contractual agreement with the cloud service provider, and all part of your due diligence process. You're going to need to understand what services are being offered to you, or what you need to supply yourself. So again, work through that contract, do your due diligence, and understand what you are getting from that provider.
Absolutely.
I would like to jump in here and actually give it a little ad for Treasury and their exercises, and we participate in the Treasury exercises. And in one that they did recently in the last year, one of the main takeaways was the issue of understanding the idea of shared responsibility between the customer and the cloud provider, and that was critically important because, again, in this particular Treasury exercise, there was a big chasm between what the customer thought they were responsible for and what the cloud provider physically could actually see on their network or couldn't see, which was really the point. And that in discussions that we had with the cloud service provider just the other day, was the critical step in migrating to the cloud and being in the cloud is a full and robust understanding of shared responsibility. I mean, obviously, cloud service provider is going to sell you as much service as you want and you can afford, but understanding what you're getting and how it meshes with what you actually are doing yourself, critically important. And then also participate in Treasury's exercises, because obviously they're very important.
And just that there's some good reasons why you might want to have more control on security within your own cloud implementation. So that's why there are different degrees to which the cloud provider may offer those security services. So just assume unless otherwise stated that don't assume the security is there unless it's otherwise stated.
All great answers. There's a question here regarding describing a tabletop ransomware exercise. All I would say to you is please access the resources that are provided on the Cybersecurity Resources webpage, and also Treasury OSIP, the Office of Critical Infrastructure and Cybersecurity. I may have said that backwards, Steve, please forgive me if I did, but OSIP, incredible resources that are available under the Hamilton series of exercises, Ncua, as well as much of the interagency participation. And I think, Ted, that reinforces the point. I see you nodding your head regarding, again, free resources and an opportunity to participate in just those kinds of exercises. Ncua in 2021, I believe, just before we got going in earnest, or maybe towards the, maybe that was 2020. wow, a whole year. But we did an exercise in partnership with U.S. Treasury covering that ransomware scenario, and just a great exercise. And there will be future plans, I'm sure, by our leadership to make sure that we are addressing that in the federally insured space and otherwise. Anyone care to add any specifics on tabletop exercise resourcing?
I would offer that if you, yes, the Hamilton exercise for Treasury, please participate. Those are fantastic. If you are doing one within your credit union or some other group of credit unions, that would be an opportunity to contact your local FBI office, ask for the cyber squad, and ask if you can get someone to come out and participate in your tabletop, to just be that law enforcement voice as you walk through your exercise. That would be a great opportunity. It's a great time to meet and develop those relationships in advance, and also while having that component to your exercise at whatever level.
Got it. And Ted, here's a question for you. Kind of involves cybercrime. Cybercrime is the subject of questionable jurisdiction. Don't know what you want to do with that one, but obviously the FBI can't do much on smaller attacks. But when will they step in, I guess, is the actual question. When will the FBI actually step in for cybercrime related attacks?
Oh, thank you. That is a great question. And that is one of the realities. I think Steve mentioned this about resources, and not everything can be worked to the same level. But this highlights the importance of why, even if you have a smaller attack, you suffer a smaller intrusion, it's important to report it to law enforcement, because those details get aggregated. That the FBI and being the central investigative body here domestically, and that the FBI would get involved if it became clear that you were the victim of a larger campaign, an identified campaign. And this kind of brings up an important thing, again, to reference something that Steve brought up in his presentation, the idea of in the U.S. government response to cybersecurity threats, there's threat response and there's asset response. The FBI is responsible for investigation, attribution, and prosecution, while the Sector Risk Management Agency, in this case Treasury, is responsible for resiliency, recovery, and restoration. And so that's why it's important, even in smaller events, to report it up to the FBI, so that all of those little bits and pieces of the puzzle can be aggregated. And you may be you might be a victim that has a critical piece of the puzzle, and we do want to hear from you. And by reporting that up, that's how we'd be able to find you as someone that we definitely need to follow up with.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I may just add that, an excellent response. I think the other resources that are out there, and just to recognize there are also non-federal resources that are out there. Of course, you do want to go to law enforcement first. There are also a number of third-party firms that will help with remediation, will help with response, and again, maybe contracted or maybe reimbursed through insurance as well. So, there are a number of resources out there. It'll depend on the type of incident and who's best positioned to serve you at that time. And just real quick, I wanted to extend my apologies. I actually have another commitment I need to run to now. I'd like to leave it with the other panelists, but thank you very much for having me here today, and hopefully to be able to do this again soon. Thank you.
Outstanding. Indeed. Well, there was a great question there regarding the OFAC list. Let's see if I can pull that up. They're coming in hot and heavy here. Just trying to keep up. I'll find that question and look to address that maybe myself. There's also some FFIEC guidance regarding OFAC that the questioner might want to access from their website. That said, how effective is having a series of backups on a sleep mode to mitigating ransomware? Tom, would you like to take that?
Well, I'm going to be honest, I'm not exactly sure what sleep mode is. So a series of backups, I'm assuming if they're removed from your network, I would think would be the best possible mitigation that you can have, and that you've tested your backups, in whatever mode you have. Those to me are the more important pieces at this point. If you can build a confidence that they are not infected, and that when you do use your backups to restore your systems, that you are restoring to non-infected machines. Otherwise, you're just going to turn around and have your data compromised again.
Got it here. Do we have any recommendations for good resources to create training? I would again direct the questioner to the cybersecurity resources webpage, whereby that cybersecurity resources handbook has been updated with just those kinds of resources. Okay, it's looking like we're get to the bottom of the list here, but let's see. What is the likelihood that paying a ransom will result in total restoration of harm? Since you have already been compromised, are you not still compromised after paying? What stops them from locking you out again? Is there any upside to paying? And that's a great question.
I'll touch on that first, and then Tom, hopefully you can provide your perspective as well. Obviously, the official U.S. government perspective is we don't believe you should pay ransom. That being said, we understand that paying ransom is a business decision, and we don't tell you how to run your business. We do ask that if you're going to pay a ransom, that you coordinate with law enforcement. In doing that, that provides some protections, and I don't want to get into the OFAC because that's Treasury, that's their expertise. But as far as what are the guarantees, whatnot, keep in mind you're dealing with a criminal enterprise. They don't have a customer service line. If you pay your money, there's no warranty, what have you. You run all of those risks that were mentioned in the question. Is that will it work? Will they still be in? In talking about resiliency, recovery, and restoration, are they gone from your network? Are you restoring to an infected system? These are all things you don't know. You might need to make a business decision depending on your business situation, the size of the ransom, what downtime costs you. But all of those things are still problems you will have when you pay a ransom. Again, just to summarize, is you're dealing with a criminal enterprise.
Absolutely. There was a piggybacking question. What's the likelihood there about trends? There were, at least, are there options or work in progress for? That's not a good question. Sorry, folks, I'm reading that out loud. There are quite the. I tell you, there's a lot of interest here, and some of these are more like opinions than they actually are the questions. So they're getting a little bit long here. What would be our recommendation for a credit union that has outsourced their IT services in regard to information security? For that, Tom, I'm going to turn to you. It seems kind of going back to the master services agreement, SLAs, and due diligence, but I'll let you explicate, sir.
Right. When we do an exam, an information security exam, and the credit union has outsourced their IT, we treat it like they're your people. We review them exactly the same. I don't know. I mean, obviously, it's a cost consideration. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. It depends on the company and how you use them and the service that they offer you. There's certain things I would like to see done in-house, and other things that it's really nice to have a well-qualified person doing for you. I know that's kind of a wishy-washy answer, but it does depend a lot on the third-party service provider that you have, and it doesn't automatically make everything better. And I think you need to be aware of that and look at your contractual relationship again with that company.
Absolutely. Okay, well, with that, gentlemen, I would like to just go do a tour of the tabla there and just ask for some final comments or remarks before turning it back over to Catherine. So, Ted, we can start with you, sir.
I think that the main takeaway here is preparation. Better to an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Incident response plans, making those relationships in advance, practicing with your backups. Actually, not just they exist, but do my people know how to restore them, and do I know what I get when they're restored? It's just preparation, because this is a question of when, not if.
Absolutely. And then, sir, Tom.
Yes, I just want to say, and I'll echo Ted here again. I've talked to a lot of credit unions about testing their incident response plan. And I think they thought it was just something I wanted them to do, and they did it as a service for the regulator. And that's not the case. It's a service for the credit union and your members. And you need to pay attention to that and look for things that you can improve upon when you do test your plan. So preparation is the key, and training is the key. I mean, train your staff and test all of your controls, not just your incident response plan.
Fantastic. And then my closing remark would be to reinforce just our contacts with law enforcement, because there were actually some duplicative questions regarding how to make that contact. Again, that cybersecurity resources guide lists your ECTF contacts, your FBI contacts, both at 1-800 numbers and with links provided. I encourage you to please access those resources. Catherine, ma'am, back to you.
Thank you, Ernie, and thank our panel. Steve left us with Treasury, but we thank Steve. We thank Ted with the FBI, and also Tom with Wisconsin Department of Financial Institutions. Thank you all so much. That information was quite a bit. It's something that we can all ruminate on, and to make sure that we're cyber smart in today's world. And please use our resource page on ncua.gov. That's Ernie's baby right there that's on the screen. We'll see you next time. We appreciate everybody staying with us for this special cybersecurity webinar. Thank you so much. Thanks, Franz. He's our back office person. Susan Robbins, who worked with us very closely as well. Ron Good for the video, and everybody that had a part in putting this together. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone, and a great week.
Thank you.
You